Did you know that you can use masking fluid on top of watercolor? We often use masking fluid to preserve the white of our paper, but we can also use it to preserve the previously painted areas of our paper as well. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use masking fluid to create this snowy tree scene by layering our masking fluid and our paint on top of each other. So let's get started. First, you'll need masking fluid. I'm using Winsor and Newton colored masking fluid. It's my favorite. And you know from my previous videos that I don't like to use a crappy brush. This is my hack for using one of my favorite brushes, the Rigger brush from Polina Bright. And I love using this brush for the really long spindly shapes of trees and tree branches. So I put a little dab of dish soap onto my desk and I thoroughly rub the bristles into the soap and get that all massaged into the brush, and this helps prevent the masking fluid from sticking into the bristles and drying and ruining the brush. So this is my favorite way to use masking fluid so that I can use whatever brush I want and it doesn't seem to hurt my brushes at all. So let's do a quick review about masking fluid. Masking fluid is a liquidy material that turns rubbery, kind of, and it prevents paint from getting underneath it so that we can preserve a color of the paper. Typically, we do this to preserve the white of the paper, but you can actually use it to preserve your painting parts of the paper as well, but we will get into that more later on in the rest of the video. So for this painting, we are wanting to paint these snowy, icy trees in this really dark, cold scene. But the trees that are closest to us, I wanted to be white. So I needed to first preserve the white of the paper in the shape of these front trees. Now, I love using the Rigger brush to paint trees because it paints them so easily. This is a type of liner brush and it has very long bristles that you can just drag across the paper without worrying about the body of the brush getting too wide because they are very long and narrow. For the trees, I'm not really painting a specific type, but I did want them to have an aspen kind of feel. So the trunk is very narrow and then it's got these long spindly branches that are coming off of it. So here's the plan for the piece. I want it to feel like the trees that are closest to us are the lightest and the most detailed, and then as it gets farther back into the distance, the trees are kind of disappearing in the dark, so they're getting darker as they get farther away from us. So I wanted to preserve some big front main center trees in the white of the paper first before we add any watercolor, because I know this piece and this video is all about using masking fluid on top of watercolor. So once we get our white areas down, we can start adding the watercolor and layering more trees on top. I also wanted to preserve some of the snow on the bottom, and I just was thinking, okay, we need a little bit of snow here and there to kind of catch the highlight, especially down towards the front and along the trees. And I also wanted to do a little splatter to preserve some of the white of the paper for a kind of snowy effect later on. And for me, I think the best technique for creating splatter is by whacking the back of your brush with another brush or a pencil. It gives it a nice, even, but chaotic spread of droplets. I added a little bit of snow above the trees for some kind of horizon line, and now we just need to wait for it to dry, magic, and then we can add paint. Before we start painting, I'm excited to tell you more about the sponsor of our video, Skillshare. Skillshare is the largest online learning community for people who love to be creative, like us. It's not only learning skills from experts about art like watercolor, but also film, design, productivity, social media marketing, and more. I personally really struggle with time management, and I recently took the Chaos to Calm Google Calendar workshop for creatives, and I really love that it's helping me focus and set intentional time for family and work for the upcoming year. You can also learn more from other artists on Skillshare about masking fluid and watercolor, like the topic of today's video, and the first 500 people to use my link in the description of this video will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. I know you will absolutely love the incredible content on their site and enjoy going through all of the different options you have for being creative. Thank you, Skillshare, for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to our painting. The beautiful part about masking fluid is once it has completely dried, we can paint right over the top. Now, you don't want this first layer to be too dark. You want it to be a shade darker than white. So I'm really focusing on a lot of water and I'm painting the entire thing. This first layer really is the easiest because we're just doing a complete paint over without really thinking anything of it. I am using cerulean blue in a very light wash, and again, you want this first layer to be light enough that it is different than the white trees that we have already blocked out, masked off with the masking fluid, but you don't want it to be so dark that we can't do darker layers going forward. Now we are going to set our paint aside because once our paint is completely dry, we can start the process all over again, but this time we are using masking fluid on top of the watercolor. Couple of things. Sometimes masking fluid can rip paper. It's usually one of two problems that you might be having. Your paper's not high quality enough, so make sure you have a 100% cotton paper that has a little bit of texture to it. You should be completely fine. Second, you did not make sure that your paper was completely bone dry before painting over it with masking fluid. So you saw me pull out my hair dryer. I don't have a heat tool. I use my hair dryer to make sure my paper is super dry before I put masking fluid on top of it. And this is because if you take the masking fluid off and it had been a little bit wet before you applied it, it will just rip your paper. I am doing the same process for this layer as I did the first layer. I am adding a few more trees. I'm getting in that layered feeling like I described in the first bit. I really want a bunch of entwined branches, very layered looking and distant. So we just need to keep in mind what this layer is going to look like. These are going to be the lighter blue trees. We don't want to take up too much of the space because we still need room for a couple more layers of trees. On the ground near where we have already added masking fluid, which will eventually be a white patch of snow, I'm also going to add some masking fluid for this layer so we have a lighter blue patch of snow. I'm thinking if I have a patch of snow and I want it to have some blend or some contrast and depth, if it's white, I would want a kind of light blue shadow that can lead into a darker shadow later. So I'm just kind of mimicking where I've already put the masking fluid down before and just kind of keeping it light because again, I want lots of layers in the darker colors as well. So I don't want to save too much of each colored layer. I also wanted to show you what it looks like when I'm done using the masking fluid. I just rinse my brush really well and it is perfectly, totally clean and fine and none of the masking fluid is sticking in the bristles. And because I'm using such a nice brush, that's why I rinse it and add the dish soap every single time for every single layer because I really don't want to ruin that brush. Now that that masking fluid layer has completely dried, we are going to continue to add more paint on top. And I want you to think about how each layer is the next color of trees. So we need this next color that we're adding to be darker than the last color. So I'm adding a little bit of indigo into our cerulean mix, and this is obviously a lot darker than the mixture before because we want to start building up the gradual increase in color as the trees are getting farther and farther away from us. But if we want these trees to be this color, that means we still have other layers of paint to add after masking fluid. I hope the process of that makes sense. And so this can't be the darkest layer either. I did add a little bit of salt while it was still wet, and then after drying it a bit with my blow dryer, I realized I didn't create a horizon line and I didn't add some of this darker color on the ground to continue to create more shadows around the white and the blue. So I am just tapping that in before moving on to the next masking fluid layer and drying everything. And you'll be able to tell at the end too that adding a horizon line and continuing to slope up the back really helps with perspective. So make sure you add that with each layer as you add the paint. Once the paper has completely dried, we prep our brush once again for more trees. Now, the exciting thing about this is our last layer of trees. It's not our last layer of paint, because if we want these trees to stand out, we need a darker layer of paint around them so that this color is preserved into the shape of a tree. So don't forget that your last layer needs to be paint for your masking fluid layers to stand out. So because these trees are a little bit farther away, they're smaller, and again, I really want everything to be very branchy and crisscrossy. So I am not afraid to put the masking fluid on top of previous layers of masking fluid. It will not mess it up. You should put the masking fluid on top and just kind of layer everything over. I think the easiest way to do this is to pretend that the other trees are not there so that everything is very connected in a straight line, especially for the trunks and the branches. You want them to look like they're connected, so just paint right over the top of them. Since this is the last layer of trees, I really go all out filling the space with as much tree branches and tree trunks as I can. I think the key is, though, to make sure that you're leaving just enough space between all of these additional branches and trunks, between the other colored trunks and also the background color that we are going to be painting. It will just kind of look like a big messy blob if you don't leave just enough space to define around the trees. So we're going to definitely give it a very full, crisscrossy, foresty feel, but make sure you're not filling every single inch with the masking fluid, just enough that you're getting the effect that you want, but that your darker color of paint will still be able to get right in between all of those nooks and crannies. And finally, once that final layer of masking fluid is completely dry, we are going to do our final layer of paint. Now, obviously, this is going to be the darkest layer, and we want it to be significantly darker than the previous layer so that it really makes that previous layer stand out. Because in a way, we are negative painting around these trees. This is just kind of the easy way to do it, even though it's time consuming by adding the masking fluid. This is essentially what we're doing. We are not painting the trees, we're painting around the trees by painting the trees. So we need to paint it dark enough that the trees that we saved with the masking fluid stand out. So only go up to your little horizon line that you've created from previously, and then we can take that darker paint and start bringing it down onto the snow, creating more shadows and depth. I'm just doing quick swipes to create these patches of shadow, and I'm following the lines and the placement of where I put the masking fluid on the previous layers. So if I am able to follow the white layer, the light layer, the medium layer, and then add another dark layer, there's going to be so much depth once the masking fluid is removed because I'll have all 4 layers present. So it's just a smart way to get a lot of depth by just following what you did before with the masking fluid. It kind of takes away some of the thought process out of these last layers. Now we have completed all of our layers of paint, all of our layers of masking fluid. Before we remove the tape and the masking fluid, I make sure that it's completely dry with my heat tool. I remove the tape first, and then I'm going to remove the masking fluid, which is one of my absolute favorite parts of this entire process, because when you're using the masking fluid, especially I use this tinted masking fluid that has color to it, it's very trippy and it starts to look wrong and weird and yellowy. And then you remove the masking fluid and it's like, hallelujah, it worked. Look at these beautiful lines and these trees and how we can see the bright white trees, the lighter trees, and then the darker trees in the distance. And it's just such a cool concept that we can save the white of the paper, but we can also save different colors on our paper as we're painting. So if you want to keep a highlighted area that's pink, or you want to keep a grass very yellow before you go in with the darker areas of grass, you can do that with masking fluid. It doesn't have to just be the white of your paper. Now, I did get a lot of leakage under my masking tape, but I'm using that little Kiridashi knife that I have that my husband forged for me. He's a blacksmith, which is pretty cool. And then I just use an eraser to help smooth out the paper, and then those edges are perfectly fixed. The first thing I want to do is create the shadows coming off of the trees that are close to us. The easiest way to do that is to get that dark blue that we've been using in the shadows that is far away from us, and just to create these simple lines coming on the snow. Now, to make this look even more realistic, you can see I'm kind of waving my brush over invisible bumps. I'm kind of making the bumps in the snow and creating more texture and more of a visualization of how the snow looks and where the bumps are by making my shadows a little bit curved over those snow bumps. So anyway, just keep the shadows very simple for that part, and then we're going to move on to the texture of the trees. For the tree texture, I was really leaning into the aspen feel of these trees, and so I mixed up my own black using all of the colors on my limited palette, but mostly magenta, yellow, and cerulean, with a tiny bit of sap green for depth. Now, I really like mixing my own black because I find that I can have it lean in different directions depending on what I'm painting. So I like that my black that I've mixed here leans a little bit cool, which fits with this painting. And then I'm just going to kind of randomly place lines and shapes and all kinds of different textures on these trees so that it looks organic and random like an aspen tree. These trees that are closest to us, these white trees, we're going to do a little bit more detail. It's going to be a lot more focused on the exactness of these shapes and the texture and the bumps, and having it be the darkest, most vivid color. And then as we get farther away into these more blue trees, I'm going to get less detailed, a little bit splotchier, a little lighter, and a little bit more washed out. And you'll see as we go through this that I am just randomly and as organically as I can placing this texture so that it looks and feels not perfect, and just like a tree that has random knots and grooves in it. I added a bit more shadow in this darker black blue color just to kind of enhance the shadow that is already there in some of these spots. And I just love how bumpy they are over the snow. It really, really makes it look like that snow is just got all kinds of lumps and bumps in it. I love it so much. I also really love how perfectly chaotic this background feels with all of these different branches going everywhere. And I think the reason that it works instead of feeling like a big, massive blob of tree branches is because they are in different colors. You can see the light, medium, and dark tree branches, and it really feels like these trees in front of you are closer, and the trees that are bluer are farther away. And then I love finishing off my winter landscapes with a little snow splatter. So I'm using white gouache for this. I put some on my brush and then I dip it into the water just to get it a little bit more mobile so it gives it a nice, good splattery feel. It kind of moves it around a little bit better. And I use the same whacking technique as I did with the masking fluid earlier, where I whack the back of my brush with a pencil. Thank you so much for being here today with me while we talked about masking fluid on top of watercolor. I hope this video helped you a lot and that you can take these techniques into your own painting practice. And I'll see you all next time. Bye.